LSU's top D-line coach target turns down the job. Why and where do they turn next? Let's talk about it. Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you for that. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers at FanDuel can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. The LSU women's basketball team loses on senior day, and Flau'jae Johnson has been shut down indefinitely. We'll talk about that coming up. Baseball Tigers got a sweep in Frisco, so we'll talk about some big takeaways from the college baseball weekend for the Tigers. Let's start, though, on the gridiron. Actually, in the coach's office, if we could, because we know last week, Bo Davis, it was reported, is leaving LSU to become the defensive line coach of the New Orleans Saints. That means that LSU now is in search of its, well, I guess however many you want to count it off, 8th or 9th defensive line coach since 2020. Of course, Bill Johnson was the D-line coach under Ed Ogeron, who retired after the COVID year. In 2021, they brought in Andre Carter, who was not retained after Ed Ogeron was fired. Then Brian Kelly brought in Jamar Cain, who left. Gerald Chatman became the interim defensive line coach. They hired Jimmy Lindsey, who, of course, became ill, was not able to ever coach that position. John Jancic was promoted. They brought in Pete Jenkins as well. And then, of course, this year it was Bo Davis. And so then this will be the ninth defensive line coach since 2020. Almost incredibly, that's a position that LSU did an amazing job for a solid decade, recruiting and developing and pumping guys into the league. That has become such a mystery how they've lacked stability there, really, over these last handful of seasons. But over the weekend, Bruce Feldman, who's now with The Athletic, reported that Gerald Chatman was a top target for LSU's defensive line coach vacancy. He's opted to remain at Florida. This was his first season with the Gators after leaving Tulane, after leaving LSU. And the Gators D-line actually had a really big improvement in sacks and TFLs. They're really good this year. They showed a lot of improvement this year under Gerald Chatman. But Chatman, when pursued by LSU, opted instead to stay put there in Gainesville. So there's going to be an obvious question of why, and I want to answer that in a second. But let me remind you who Gerald Chatman is first, if you're not familiar. So Gerald Chatman is guys from Wisconsin who played at Wisconsin Oshkosh and started his coaching career in 2015 as a GA at Texas A&M. So he went from Texas A&M. He spent a summer with the Denver Broncos as an intern. Then he went to Elon, where he became the defensive line coach for 1 year. Then he went to Tennessee State for 2 years, then to the Cincinnati Bengals in 2019 and 2020 as a defensive assistant. So he was there for Burrow's rookie year in 2020. Then LSU, Ed Ogeron, brought Gerald Chatman to Baton Rouge as a defensive line analyst in 2021. Of course, Ed and his staff were let go when Brian Kelly came in. So Gerald Chatman is hired by Tulane as their defensive line coach for 2022. So he goes through the spring ball there in 2022 with Tulane, but then he gets hired at Colorado. And so he never coaches a game at Tulane. He coaches the spring at Tulane, then Colorado hires him in 2022. So he coaches at Colorado in 22. And then, of course, that staff was let go. Deion Sanders came in, did not retain Gerald Chatman or any of the staff. So then Gerald Chatman comes back to LSU in 2023. So this is the beginning of 2023, right? And Jamar Cain is the defensive line coach at LSU. Well, in the middle of spring, Jamar Cain gets hired by the Denver Broncos. So LSU promotes Gerald Chatman to interim defensive line coach for the spring of 2023. Well, they didn't give Gerald Chatman the job full time. Instead, they hired Jimmy Lindsey. At that point, Tulane rehired Gerald Chatman as their defensive line coach. So he spent the 2023 season at Tulane. And then this year in 2024, this most recent season, I should say, in 2024, Billy Napier brought him to Gainesville. So Gerald Chatman had been there. That is a lot of movement. Since 2015, Gerald Chatman has never been at one place more than 2 years. He was at Tennessee State for 2 years, then the Bengals for 2 years. Then he was at LSU, and then a spring at Tulane, then a season at Colorado, a spring at LSU, another season at Tulane, and then this year at Florida. So he has moved around an awful lot, and that may be part of it. I want to remind you, like, Gerald Chatman is married, and he and his wife have 4 children, age 7 and under. So they've got a young family, and they keep moving for his work. So that's part of it. I'm certain that's going to be part of it, is saying, can we find stability in a place? I think there's probably also some component to say Brian Kelly could have hired Gerald Chatman twice. Now, he did bring him back to staff, but he could have promoted him twice. Now, he was on staff in 2021, and then when Ed Ogeron was fired and Kelly came in, Kelly didn't retain really anybody. So he was gone. I mean, remember, that included Corey Raymond, Blake Baker as well. Well, they both made their way back. Well, so too did Gerald Chatman, because Brian Kelly brought him back as an analyst after the 22 season. So for 2023, and this is when he's promoted to interim defensive line coach. So he did come back. But again, whenever Jamar Cain left for the Broncos, Chatman was promoted from analyst to defensive line, interim defensive line coach for spring. But then they hired Jimmy Lindsey. He didn't get the job full time there. So maybe there's part of that. So I know there's probably some people who might want to lay this at the feet of Brian Kelly, but I want to, in fairness, share this with you. Last week on my radio show, I had a chance to visit with Pete Jenkins, a legendary defensive line coach, and we all know Coach Pete's story. He's done multiple stints at LSU, including last year when things were not going well under John Jancic. After Jimmy Lindsey became ill, Coach Kelly brought Pete Jenkins back in to work with the team, starting with that Missouri week after the Ole Miss fiasco in 2023. Of course, Pete Jenkins recruited, coached Bo Davis. They have a great relationship. They talk all the time. And Coach Pete kind of relayed a lot of the conversations he had with Bo about taking the Saints job and how difficult it was. But they did talk about Brian Kelly. Give a listen.
And he expressed to me how much he liked Coach Kelly. Okay? And Bo don't like just everybody, to be honest with you. But he had nothing but good things. See, I told him when we were trying to hire him, I said, Kelly has been so good to me. I mean, I really like him as a human being. And he made it possible for me to do what I did last year and try to be helpful to LSU, because he told me at one time, he said, if you'll come back, you don't even, this is when he was hiring me. He said, if it's too much trouble or too much, you don't even have to make the road trips if you don't want to. Well, hell, that wasn't going to happen. You know, I mean, I wasn't going to work with those guys all damn week and then desert them on game day and not be able to try to help them a little bit during the game. Anyways, the guy and Bo was complimentary, really complimentary. He and I talked about how much, how Kelly would eat. Bo said Kelly would have been the same way to him, really good to him. So it wasn't easy to say.
So there's going to be a lot of people who try to lay this at Brian Kelly's feet. Like, you don't take my word for it. There's Pete Jenkins telling you firsthand a conversation he had with Bo Davis about how good Brian Kelly has been to them. Corey Raymond came back. Blake Baker came back. There's, Brian Kelly has his flaws and has made mistakes since he's been the coach at LSU. I've talked about plenty of them over the years he's been here. He's also done a lot of good, and I do think he gets a lot of unfair criticism and blame for the perception of him as a person. I don't know anyone more credible in coaching than Pete Jenkins, and he's telling you point blank that he's vouching for Brian Kelly and that he and Bo Davis both thought he was great as a person and great to him. So, like, that's part of it. So there's also the component with Gerald Chatman financially. Look, Bo Davis was making $1.25 million this year. Gerald Chatman was making $576 at Florida. Chances are, if LSU was going to hire him, he was going to get a raise. Now, maybe Florida will give him a raise too. I don't know. But you can go through a lot of different things here and understand why it might make sense. But most importantly, I think it's probably the fact that he's going to find some stability. And do you really leave to come back to LSU when this year at Florida, they had a really good season? He's recruited well there. And he saw some guys, take some big leaps. Caleb Banks, Cam Jackson, who at one time was an LSU commit. Both had really good seasons this year. Veteran players that had breakout seasons. They got some good young talent there as well. So, I think it's never a good feeling to have someone you're targeting turn you down. But I think there's reasons why this makes sense. Maybe there's some ill will there because Kelly had a chance to promote him twice and didn't. Really once. Maybe it's financial. I don't know that because I don't know. I can't tell you definitively what LSU was going to offer Gerald Chatman. Probably better than the 576 he's making in Florida. But more than likely, it's about stability for Gerald Chatman. It's about the fact that he's never been at any place longer than 2 years since 2015. And it's a good opportunity for him to maybe set roots. Now, if they have a bad season this year at Florida, his roots may be coming up anyway because Billy Napier may be let go in Gainesville if they have another bad season. But remains to be seen. So where does LSU turn next? That still very much up in the air right now. Remember, for spring, if it comes down to it, they certainly could just have Kevin Peoples coach the entire defensive line. And then Jamari Rasco, who is Bo Davis's GA, could certainly step up and help as well. We saw Dennis Johnson, Meatball, do that years ago. That's not uncommon. And then remember, also your analysts can now coach on the field. So just like a year ago when Bob Diaco was working as an analyst, he was coaching all the special teams on the field at practice, has a headset during the game. So with your defensive analyst staff, no doubt you can get someone there to help with spring as well until you can find a full-time replacement, whomever that may be. As we hear or learn of more names to discuss, we'll certainly talk about here on Locked On LSU. Baseball Tigers got a sweep over the weekend. We'll give you some takeaways of that as we continue Locked On LSU, your team every day. Attention, Locked On LSU fans. Ever wish you could directly support your favorite LSU athletes and be part of their journey? Well, now you can with Roy, the NIL app that puts fans in control. Before Roy, NIL deals were often handled behind closed doors. Fans like you didn't have a clear path or way to support the players that you love. Now, with Roy, you can make a real impact and feel closer to the athletes representing LSU. With Roy, you get to choose the player you want to support. You get to decide how much you want to contribute. You get exclusive content straight from the athletes that you support. And the best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. So it's a risk-free way to show your support and make your voice heard. Support your favorite players directly and help shape the future of LSU sports. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing LSU athletes the way they deserve, with transparency, trust, and real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. Baseball Tigers sweep through a weekend in Frisco. And I got a couple of takeaways from the weekend for LSU. Of course, beating Kansas State in 10 innings on Friday, coming back and beating Nebraska on Saturday, and then Sam Houston 12-8 on Sunday. Maybe my single biggest takeaway, and then we'll get into some nuance, is that LSU went on the road and played three good, regional caliber teams and won all three games in very different fashions. So the Kansas State game, of course, was a a back and forth game that ultimately you ended up winning 8-5 in 10 innings. Of course, you put up the 3 spot in the 10th, which is how you get the 3-run margin. But that was a game where, I mean, you needed a defensive play in the ninth to cut down a runner at the plate to send the thing to extras where you had a chance to win it. But you win this game in extras. That's really, a tight ball game back and forth. On Saturday, you play Nebraska and you find yourself down 5-0 in a blink, but then Anthony Ianson steadies the game and your offense exploded, 10 unanswered. You end up winning that game 11-6 against Nebraska. And then on Sunday, you got up big on Sam Houston. I mean, you were up 7-0 after 2. You were up 11-4 going into the bottom of the 5th. And going into the 6th. And ultimately they charged and you had to hold off a pretty furious rally there by Sam Houston in large part because of your pitching staff giving away too many free passes. But anyway, all that to say, you won 3 games very different ways. You won a very close game that you needed to in extras that was back and forth. You won a game where you got down big and came back and won it. And then you won a game where you were up big and then they kind of made it interesting, but you managed to get enough outs. LSU threw up zeros in the 7th, 8th, and 9th on Sunday after Sam Houston had made their charge, including a 1-2-3 8th by DJ Primo, which was a nice bounce back for him. So that's what I would say is the biggest thing. I know over the weekend, maybe the biggest complaint that LSU fans had was nothing to do with the team. It was more with the game streaming at d1baseball.com. But I want to remind you this, for those that aren't familiar with how that works, and this isn't to take on the game or the streaming service. I mean, but it's just an explanation that'll get to my bigger point. So, of course, LSU and all the teams in the SEC sign their grant of rights to the league. So, meaning all 16 members sign over their broadcast rights to the SEC, so the SEC can go negotiate one deal for the whole league, right? Well, the SEC has their deal with ESPN, as we know. Well, that is for home games or for league games. When LSU chooses to go play in something like the Frisco Classic, that's not an SEC-sanctioned event. That's an event that D1 Baseball put on, kind of like bowl games. D1 Baseball went and found the venue. They found the sponsors. They recruited the teams to come play. And so the teams get a payout for going, but then they also own, D1 Baseball owns the broadcast rights. So they decided to bring the streaming in-house. That's why it was the way it was. And that stinks for the fans. There's no doubt. That stinks for the fans that want to watch this team. But it's great for the team. Because what you did this weekend is you went on the road to a beautiful ballpark in front of a giant crowd, in particular on Saturday, and you played effectively what amounts to a regional format. A regional is a 4-team format. You went and played a mini regional in February, in the beginning of March, against good teams that might well be in regional play. You have to simulate that for your team for when it happens, and it's going to happen later in this season. So if you're Jay Johnson, you're going, look, I know this stinks for the fans, but we recruit in Texas, and I get to put my team through a fire here before conference play starts and simulate postseason play. That's a win. It is. It's the right thing to do. Big picture. It stinks in the macro for us who want to watch the game and you got to stream it, pay this website like that. All that stinks. But competitively, it's the right thing for LSU to do, which is why I'm glad that they went and did this, because you have to go mimic a regional effectively at the end of February, beginning of March against good teams, and you end up sweeping through this weekend. A couple of things. Individually, I thought Josh Pearson was awesome. Of course, he comes up with what ends up being the game-winning RBI in the 10th inning on Friday. He has 3 doubles on Saturday, comeback on Sunday against Sam Houston, and Pearson, has another big day for LSU. Forgive me, I'm trying to pull up the box score right now so I can have it in front of me, but so I can get you all that info. But Pearson was a big part of LSU's big offensive day on Sunday against Sam Houston State. So Pearson finished. He was 1 for 2 with 3 walks, and he scored 3 runs. So monster weekend for Josh Pearson. Also, a monster weekend for Derek Curiel, who, what do you do for an encore? All the kid's doing is getting on base. I say kid, the young guy's getting on base at nearly a 550 clip. He goes 2 for 3 with a double, a single, and 3 walks, gets on base 5 more times. It's so good to have that guy at the top of the lineup that is a table setter. Because what you want from the top of your lineup are guys that will get on base so that your run producers can knock them in, can come up with runners on base. And so now you're seeing Curiel Jones and then Dickinson following him, and you're starting to see teams sort of rationalize that decision of what to do about Bear Jones. It happened on Wednesday against Dallas Baptist when Dallas Baptist walked Bear Jones, and then Dickinson hit a 3-run homer. And then on Sunday, they decided with a base open and 2 out in the second to pitch to Jones, who had an RBI double, and then followed with Dickinson's single, and then Fry's 3-run homer, which put up the big 7 spot. Teams have to make a decision. You pitch to Jones. If you don't pitch to Jones, you got to deal with Dickinson. Some teams are saying, might as well just pitch to Jones because we don't want to put somebody on for Dickinson. So it's proving depth and productivity here in the lineup top to bottom for LSU. In particular, in the game on Sunday, I love that LSU's hitters worked 8 walks, 12 runs on 13 hits, 8 walks was fantastic. You really carried the momentum offensively from Saturday into Sunday, which was great to see. One disappointing part was the bottom of the 5th. You're up 11-4. You have the bases loaded with nobody out for Dickinson, Fry, Milam, and you came away with no runs. Dickinson struck out, Fry struck out, Milam flied out weakly to center. That's disappointing because you had a chance when it was 11-4 to put a chokehold on that game and possibly run rule that team, but you got lazy with some at-bats. Teaching moment early in the season. No doubt Jay and staff will look at that, but good to see. I know there's one thing that most people today are disappointed in, complaining about, and it's the bullpen and certainly the walks. Look, that was certainly the case on Sunday. LSU walked 10 and struck out 5. It's not, 6. It's going to be a rare day that this staff walks more than they strike out hitters, the pitching staff. But this is also a time in the season where Jay Johnson and his staff are still learning their plays. I want to put this into perspective. So let's just look at Sunday with Sam Houston, right? Where we saw Shores, Cade Woods, Cooper Williams, Connor Benj, DJ Primo, Maverick Rizzi, Jaden Newt. We saw 7 pitchers. Skip Berman used to say by the time you get to Omaha, you were only counting on 6 or 7 pitchers total. Like that was the only ones you were going to use in Omaha. Maybe that's expanded a little bit now just because of the format. But the point being, what if I told you right now LSU has Anderson, Ianson, Shores, Connor Ware. It's 4 right there. Zach Cohen, they certainly trust. Connor Benj, they trust. Kason Evans, they absolutely trust in a stopper spot as well. William Schmidt is going to play a role on this team. And we haven't even talked about Gavin Guidry. That's 9. That's 9 guys right there that you really feel like you're going to be able to count on. So the point is, when you get into conference play, you're going to have guys that only see action when you're up 10, down 10. It's the up 10, down 10 guys, right? Or midweeks. And maybe that's the role that Cooper Williams and Cade Woods and Jaden Newt and Maverick Rizzi, DJ Primo, maybe that's the role those guys fill. Is they're your up 10, down 10 guys or guys that pitch for you in the midweek and they're still growing and developing. We just don't know yet. But the point is, I guess, I'm not so disappointed or upset. I'm bummed to see LSU go walk 10 guys. I mean, everything on Sunday that Sam Houston got was a result of LSU's pitchers giving them opportunities. Sam Houston had 9 hits, but they didn't hit the ball hard at all day. I mean, look at all of their run-producing innings. When they got an RBI single, which beat the shift, got on base with a couple of walks. In the fourth, leadoff walk, single, strikeout, wild pitch, walk with the bases loaded, scored a run. I mean, the fact is, when they had their uprisings, the bottom of the fifth, the top of the sixth, Cade Woods comes in, single, walk, pass ball, walk, single. You bring in Cooper Williams, walk with the bases loaded. Like, you were giving them those opportunities. So clean up those things and you feel much better. I don't think we're overhyping this pitching staff, because the point in praising them was praising the arm talent, which is true. You got 8 dudes that can throw 95 or higher. Like, that's objectively fact, but they got to throw it over the plate. Cam Johnson last year was a tremendous arm talent, upper 90s from the left side. Couldn't throw it over the plate. Doesn't matter how hard you throw. So a lot of that is going to be learning here in the early part of the season who you can count on in these roles. Because the reality is, when you get to regional, super regional Omaha, you're not using 15 pitchers. You're using 8. 8 guys you can count on. So find out now who those guys are for later. That's the most important part. And then, this will be an interesting week. Tigers will play 5 games this week, on Tuesday, Wednesday against North Dakota State, then a weekend against North Alabama. This is an opponent you're going to be able to overpower and overwhelm. So go out there, like I give you the football analogy, like when you play Nichols. You're not going to learn anything by scoring 70 in a game like that. But what you want to do is don't turn the ball over. Tackle soundly. Don't commit dumb penalties. Like, those are the types that catch the football. Those are the types of things you want to do that you can control. Same this week. Throw strikes. Don't walk guys. Don't hit guys. Be sound offensively with your team-focused approach like they have been for most of the week. And by the way, for everyone who says this team, they don't come through too many times, the base is loaded, they strike out in the clutch, whatever. Look, I'm usually resistant to that, because we know the old cliche. You fail 70% of the time, you're in the Hall of Fame, right? So there's going to be times where you come up with runners in scoring position and you don't get the knock. Hunt Palmer tweeted this. Saturday and Sunday, so against Nebraska and Sam Houston State, LSU is 14 of 33 with runners in scoring position. That's .424. LSU batted .424 with runners in scoring position on Saturday and Sunday. And that's not even counting Stanfield, who twice, with a runner on third and less than 2 outs, did exactly what he had to do. Put the ball in play behind the runner to get the runner home. And he did it twice. Scored 2 runs. That was a guy that earlier this week struck out twice with the bases loaded, an 0 for 4 day. Well, this showed progress in being a team-oriented guy in a situation where you had to do one thing. You had to get the ball in play on the ground to the right side or in the air to the outfield to get that run home. He did it twice. So LSU showing you a lot of different ways. Fry blasted a 3-run homer. Milam hit a leadoff homer in the second inning. They also manufactured a couple of runs with playing station to station baseball. They're showing you they can beat you a lot of different ways, which is undeniably true about this LSU team as we continue to learn more and more about it. A busy week for the Tigers here with 5 games this week. Kim Mulkey and the LSU women's basketball team wrapped up the regular season on Sunday, but the loss to Ole Miss was only part of the conversation. We'll wrap up next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. When a game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally, you're picking a player to hit a clutch 3, you never feel like you miss your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Kim Mulkey's squad dropped their regular season finale on Sunday at the Maravich Center. Disappointing, certainly, for senior night to have it go down the way it did. But LSU led by as many as 15 in the first half, and they let go of the rope in the second half. Ole Miss storms back, unranked Ole Miss storms back to beat number 7 LSU 85-77. So the Tigers fall to 27-4 overall, 12-4 in conference play. And unfortunately, Ole Miss scored 27 points off of turnovers throughout the game. And now the Tigers will head to the SEC tournament coming off a loss. But that is only part of the story. The bigger news is that before the game on Sunday, Kim Mulkey was doing her pregame radio interview and disclosed that Flau'jae Johnson would not play through the SEC tournament as she nurses a shin injury, like shin tightness. So Flau'jae was at the game in a boot for stability, no doubt, but didn't play against Ole Miss and is not going to participate in the SEC tournament, and then is expected to be ready to be back in time for regional for the NCAA tournament. So LSU is the 3 seed. LSU will play on the 7th, which is Friday. So LSU will get the winner of Game 7, which will be Ole Miss against the winner of Game 3, which is Mississippi State, Missouri. So Mississippi State, Missouri play, the winner plays Ole Miss. The winner of that game will play LSU on Friday. So if LSU wins on Friday, they'd advance to the weekend where you'd be 2 wins away from an SEC championship. But again, bigger goals here, which are make a deep run into the NCAA tournament, try to go win a national championship. So if giving Flau'jae a couple of weeks off gets you there, is closer to getting you there because it gives her time off, awesome. Totally understand it. So a disappointing loss, but by and large, I think the feeling with LSU is that their seed line is pretty much set. With the loss to Alabama this week, the shot of getting a 1 seed kind of went out of the window. So LSU very likely lands on the 2 line, possibly a 3. You never exactly know with the committee, but I'm talking about in the NCAA tournament now. Possibly a 3 seed, but most likely a 2 seed for LSU in the NCAA tournament whenever we find out on after the SEC women's basketball tournament. So no Flau'jae here this week. The SEC women's basketball tournament is in Greenville, South Carolina. If you're wondering about the full bracket, South Carolina and Texas had to have a coin flip to determine the 1 seed, and South Carolina won the coin flip. So South Carolina is the 1 seed, Texas is the 2, LSU 3, and then Kentucky, who LSU rallied to beat up in Lexington last week, is the 4 seed. We'll certainly be following, hopefully, all the way a trip to the Final Four for the LSU women's basketball Tigers. Okay, that'll do it for us here in today's episode of Locked On LSU. If you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.